Wait, what did he get? A rock and a damn dog? Owen's laughter cracked like a whip through the polished air of the law office, bouncing off the mahogany panels and antique bookshelves. His tailored suit strained slightly as he leaned back in the chair, smugness oozing from every angle of his posture. Across from him, Eli Barrett didn't move. He sat still, hands folded, expression unreadable. But in his lap, the thin map that had just been passed to him fluttered gently, caught by the breeze from the cracked window behind him. A red circle marked one isolated spot on the Oregon coastline. Falcon's Rest. "It's poetic, really," Owen said, turning to the estate lawyer with mock sympathy. "All I get is the family fortune, the company, the penthouse, and my cousin gets some wind-blasted island no one's wanted in 50 years and a mutt with hip dysplasia." He chuckled again, but no one joined him this time. Mr. Kessler, the lawyer, cleared his throat. He was a thin man in a grey vest, hands folded carefully over a stack of old documents. Per the final will and testament of Mr. Arthur Barrett, the property known as Falcon's Rest and the care of his companion animal, Axel, are to pass solely to Mr. Eli Barrett. "Why?" Owen scoffed. "The old man barely spoke to him the last 2 decades. I'm the one who visited. I'm the one who kept the Barrett name in the headlines." Eli looked up at him. His voice was quiet, controlled. "And I'm the one who didn't put his face on company billboards." Owen flushed, but didn't answer. He turned his attention back to his phone with a dismissive flick of the wrist. Mr. Kessler pushed forward a second envelope, this one aged, sealed with red wax. "Your grandfather left you a letter as well, Mr. Barrett. Handwritten. He was very specific." Eli opened it slowly. Inside, the letter was short. One line jumped off the page. "The world will always be loud, Eli. Falcon's Rest is where we listen." His hand trembled slightly as he folded the paper. He said nothing. He didn't need to. In his eyes was the quiet of someone who had learned to read the space between words. 2 hours later, Eli stood at the edge of the Port Lane docks, the salt air stinging his face. A misty rain had started, thin enough to ignore, but cold enough to feel. He wore an old canvas jacket, worn at the seams, and his boots were still damp from the 6-hour drive north. The place smelled of brine, diesel, and pine, a familiar mixture. Behind him, his truck idled with a low hum. In front of him sat a small transport boat, its blue paint chipped from years of hard work. On its deck stood a man in a yellow raincoat coiling rope with methodical precision. And beside the man, barely visible in the grey light, sat the dog. Axel. Eli's breath caught. The lawyer's description hadn't done him justice. This was no ordinary shepherd. He was massive, built like a boulder, with a thick coat mottled in greys and frost white, like the surf before a storm. He didn't move when Eli approached, didn't wag. Just stared, amber eyes steady, ears up, muscles taut. Watchful. The man in the raincoat glanced up. "You Barrett?" "Eli." He gave a grunt, then nodded towards the dog. "He's been waiting since the old man passed." "Won't eat from anyone else. Just stares at the sea, spooked half the harbor with how quiet he is." Eli stepped closer, slowly. He crouched, hand extended, palm up. "Hey there, Axel," he said, voice low and even. "Heard you've been holding down the fort." The shepherd studied him. Then, with the tiniest motion, stepped forward and pressed his nose to Eli's palm. No fanfare, no bark. Just a weighty, deliberate gesture that said everything. The man blinked. "Well, I'll be damned." Eli stood. "Let's go." The boat ride was rough, not weather-wise, just quiet in the way that frays nerves. The kind of quiet that creeps in when you're too far from shore, but not far enough to pretend you don't miss it. Axel stood at the front the whole time, unshaken by the motion. his body still, ears alert, as if he were waiting for something just beyond the fog. "Your grandfather was different," the ferryman offered at last. "Built the place himself. Said the island had a job to do, that it needed someone to keep watch." Eli didn't respond. His eyes were on the jagged silhouette emerging ahead. Falcon's Rest looked less like land and more like a wound in the ocean, dark, sharp, and solitary. As the boat approached the tiny landing, Axel jumped ashore first, landing with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing the ground won't betray you. Eli followed. The wind screamed around them. The cabin was visible in the distance, slouched against the granite like an old man hunched from too many winters. They climbed in silence. The cabin was worse than expected. The wood was warped, paint stripped clean by years of storm, windows cloudy with salt, one shutter hanging by a rusted hinge. Eli opened the door. The creak wasn't theatrical. It was exhausted. Inside, dust and salt had settled into every crevice. A fireless hearth sat at the far wall. It looked like the kind of place forgotten by time and by design. Eli set his pack down, took a long breath. The smell of old rope, burned wood, and something faintly electrical. He glanced at Axel. The dog was standing motionless at the hearth, staring into it. "You okay?" Axel didn't move. Then he padded forward and pressed his nose to the stone. His body tensed. He didn't bark, he didn't growl. But the air shifted. It was the same way it did before a helicopter appeared over a ridge. That sense of something coming. Eli stepped closer, placed a hand on the dog's back. Axel didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He simply waited. The hearth was just stone, solid, cracked, nothing special. Except Axel wouldn't stop watching it. Eli crouched and ran a hand along the edge. Cold, damp. But just beneath the center slab, his fingers caught something. An edge that didn't belong. A seam. His heartbeat jumped. He looked at Axel. "You knew." The dog finally looked at him. And for a flicker of a moment, Eli swore he saw approval. Not the kind dogs give when you throw a ball. The kind a soldier gives to another when the plan clicks into place. He stood slowly, turned toward the back wall. Rain hit the roof in sudden, sharp bursts. Somewhere behind the hearth, behind the stone and storm and silence, something was waiting. And this dog, this animal left to him as a joke, was guarding it like a soldier on his final post. Eli glanced down at Axel, who sat, ears forward, eyes locked on him. "All right," he said softly. "I'm listening." Falcon's Rest didn't welcome them. It tolerated them. The cabin sat hunched on a granite outcrop, like an old veteran, too proud to fall, but too broken to stand tall. Salt had stripped every trace of paint, and the wooden planks beneath Eli's boots groaned with the weight of time. Moss clung to the edges of the roof like stubborn memories. The door stuck on the bottom corner when he pushed it open, revealing the kind of silence only found in places left behind by everyone but the wind. Inside, the air was thick with cold and history. Everything smelled faintly of smoke and rust. The hearth was black with old soot. A rusted pot sat crooked on a shelf above it, as if someone had left mid-thought and never returned. The windows were blurry with salt scum and fog, muting the grey light outside. Eli dropped his pack by the door and stood still. Listening, Axel padded past him, slow, deliberate. His claws clicked once, twice, then stopped. The dog stood at the center of the room, head low, eyes fixed on the hearth. "You already knew," Eli murmured. No response, of course, but Axel didn't move. He stared at the stone like it owed him something. The next few hours passed in quiet labor. Eli cleared debris from the single bedroom, tested the warped water pump out back, and found a can of propane just full enough to coax a flicker out of the battered stovetop. Everything creaked, Everything resisted. It felt less like a home and more like a dare. That night, the storm rolled in. It hit hard and fast, slamming the coastline with wind that howled through the gaps in the walls. Rain peppered the windows like gravel. The cabin shook. Eli lay on a cot in the main room, boots still on, flashlight on his chest, listening to the timbers groan and shift. But the storm wasn't what kept him awake. Axel was growling, not loudly, not aggressively, a low, sustained sound deep in his chest, barely audible over the wind. But it never stopped. He was lying near the hearth, eyes locked on the stones, head lowered, tail stiff, a statue carved from tension. Eli sat up. "Hey," he whispered. "You good?" The growling didn't change. It wasn't fear. It wasn't warning. It was pressure, urgency. Like the dog was watching something no one else could see. He clicked on the flashlight and swept it over the hearth. Nothing. Just old stone. Cracked. Dull. But Axel's gaze didn't waver. "All right," Eli said under his breath. "We'll deal with it tomorrow." He lay back down, but he didn't sleep. By morning, the wind had died, but the air hung heavy and strange, like the ocean had exhaled and wasn't sure if it should inhale again. Eli brewed instant coffee with rainwater and stale heat. Axel hadn't moved. When Eli placed the cup on the windowsill and crouched beside him, the dog shifted just slightly to block his path to the hearth. "What are you hearing, boy?" Axel didn't respond, but his ears flicked toward the floor. Then his paw lifted slow and deliberate and tapped the stone once, then again. It was the only sound in the room besides the soft hiss of the kettle and the distant echo of gulls. Eli touched the stone. Cold, dry. He pressed his ear to it. Nothing. But something was wrong, not with the stone, but with the silence. It was too perfect. No creak, no drip. No settling groan of the cabin's bones, just stillness, as if the island itself were holding its breath. He stepped back. "Okay, you've got my attention." The next few days passed with a strange rhythm. Every morning, Axel would do his Patrol 1 slow circuit around the perimeter. Then he would return and lie in front of the hearth, watching, waiting. At night, the growling returned. Eli kept telling himself it was just instinct. The dog was disoriented, confused. But Axel wasn't confused. He was working, vigilant, and that terrified Eli more than he wanted to admit. 3 days in, while repairing a collapsed beam near the back of the cabin, Eli discovered a metal box beneath a pile of old tarp and rotted plywood. Inside, a bundle of faded topographic maps and a sealed envelope. On the back, written in thick block letters, "Do not trust the surface. Listen, then dig." Inside the envelope was a schematic hand-drawn, lines sharp and precise. Not the scrawl of a fisherman or hermit. This was engineering. Military. It mapped the layout of the cabin, then continued downward. A second level, beneath the hearth. Eli stared at the drawing, his pulse quickening. "You've been trying to tell me this the whole time," he said. Axel looked up, ears twitching. That night, the wind rose again. But Eli didn't sleep. He sat by the hearth, flashlight on, maps spread before him, hand resting on Axel's back. The storm howled, and for the first time, Eli felt something under the stone. A pulse, not a sound, not a vibration, a pressure, a sense of something waiting. He whispered, "This island breathes." Axel's head lifted, eyes alert, and then he barked, once, sharp, deliberate. Eli stood. They were no longer guests here. They were being summoned. It started just after 2 a.m. Eli was half asleep, wrapped in a wool blanket on the cot near the window, when the noise yanked him fully awake. It wasn't the wind or the creak of old timber. It was claws on stone sharp, urgent and relentless. He sat up instantly. "Axel?" The dog didn't turn. He was in front of the hearth, digging at the slab with a fury Eli hadn't seen before. Not aimless, not agitated. Focused, as if he knew there was something beneath it that didn't belong. His shoulders bunched with every motion, claws clicking against the surface in fast, surgical bursts. "Hey, stop!" Eli swung his legs off the cot and crossed the room in 3 long steps. "You're gonna tear your paws open." But Axel didn't stop. He let out a low, frustrated whine that turned into a short, clipped bark. Then he scratched again, twice more. His eyes flicked to Eli, then back to the slab. That's when it hit. Afghanistan, 2011. A dark alley. A dog handler had shouted for everyone to stop, seconds before a tripwire. The K9 had frozen mid-step, ears forward, body locked like a statue. It had saved 5 lives that night. Maybe more. Eli stared at Axel, heart pounding. "You're not just scratching, you're pointing." He dropped to one knee. The stone felt solid under his palm, cold from the storm. But as he traced his fingers along its perimeter, he felt it. A hairline gap, one that didn't belong. Perfectly cut, square, flush with the floor, hidden in plain sight. "All right," he whispered, already pushing to his feet. "You win." He grabbed the pry bar from the tool chest near the door and returned, wedging it into the seam. The slab resisted. Old, heavy. He braced his foot against the hearth, gritted his teeth, and heaved. A deep groan echoed through the cabin as the stone shifted. The slab tilted up just a few inches enough to slide his fingers underneath. Eli grunted and lifted with everything he had. It rose. Underneath was no foundation, no dirt, just a hollow cavity, neatly carved and reinforced with thick steel. A vault. The air that wafted out smelled metallic, dry, untouched by time. Eli leaned in, eyes narrowing in the dim light. Inside lay 2 objects. The first was a thick, rectangular bundle wrapped in oilcloth, sealed tight with waxed cord. He pulled it out gently and set it aside. The second caught the light. A heavy brass object, cold to the touch. Precision machined. Cylindrical at one end, with interlocking notches. A T-shaped handle. Not a weapon. Not a tool in the conventional sense. It looked like a key, but not for any lock you'd find in a house. He turned to Axel. The dog sat beside him now, silent, watching. No wag, no movement, just approval. Eli unwrapped the oilcloth. The journal inside was in pristine condition, thick, cream-colored pages. The handwriting was exact, calculated. No wasted ink. "My name is Arthur Barrett. In 1968, I was honorably discharged from the United States Navy. My work with SOSUS taught me one thing. The sea is never truly silent. It's just waiting to be heard." Eli blinked. He flipped through the first few pages, each filled with graphs, technical sketches, sonar grids, notations in shorthand, some of it still familiar from his own training. He turned to the next entry. "This island, Falcon's Rest, sits atop a geological anomaly. A dense granite lens that amplifies low-frequency ocean sounds naturally. It doesn't just hear the ocean, it interprets it." The words sank in slowly, like cold water through boots. It wasn't a cabin on a rock. It was a listening post. Eli flipped farther. One section was marked off with a strip of red thread. He followed it to the final dozen pages schematics of buried turbines, sealed conduits, and a bunker layout that extended far beyond the dimensions of the house. At the center of the diagram was a labeled chamber, Core Acoustic Array. There was a note underneath it. "The key activates the primary access point. If you found this, it means the system has been dormant too long. Reactivation must occur during spring tide for full access." Eli looked back down at the key. That's what the dog had been waiting for. Not food, not safety. Authorization. The wind outside picked up again, but it sounded different now. Less like chaos, more like movement, like breath. Eli's skin prickled. He turned to Axel, who stood slowly and walked to the hearth, looking down into the open vault. He sat, watching, not guarding anymore, inviting. Eli didn't say a word. He just knelt beside him, the journal in one hand, the brass key in the other. There was more beneath this island. Axel had known all along. The wind slammed against the cabin walls like it was trying to shake loose the truth. Eli sat at the wooden table near the hearth, the oilcloth journal open before him. Pages filled with naval shorthand, grid coordinates, and cryptic abbreviations spread out like a map of a forgotten war. At his side, Axel lay silently, head resting on his paws, amber eyes tracking every flick of Eli's pencil. The cipher wasn't easy. It wasn't supposed to be. Eli recognized some of the formatting NATO-style grid rotations, layered substitution code using oceanic depth markers. It was the kind of thing designed to keep out curious civilians and green intelligence officers. But to a man who'd once memorized the blast radius of every mortar shell in Afghanistan, it was like reading a dead man's diary in the dark. Line by line, he worked. Axel didn't move. The final decoded message chilled him. Spring tide, dog watch, trident base, turn the key. He looked down at the journal's diagram, a crude, hand-sketched rendering of Falcon's Rest, with a triangular mark on the northern face of the cliff labelled Trident. It was the only part of the island he hadn't explored. Sheer, slick, and battered by waves 20 feet high most of the day. But if the cipher was right, that's where the access point would be exposed during spring tide, when the moon's pull left the rock at its rawest. Eli stared at the brass key on the table. Heavy, solid, alive in his palm. "Come on," he said, standing. Axel was already on his feet. They waited 2 days. Then, just after 1,700 hours, the tide rolled out lower than Eli had ever seen it. The seafloor peeled away, exposing barnacle-crusted stones that hadn't seen sunlight in decades. Eli and Axel climbed down the jagged slope, boots slipping on wet rock and kelp. The trident formation was unmistakable. 3 granite pillars rising from the base of the ledge, pointing skyward like rusted harpoons. At the base of the middle one, partly obscured by seaweed and black algae, was a square outline carved directly into the cliff. Eli dropped to his knees and wiped away the slime. A circular indentation, no bigger than a coffee lid, sat flush with the rock. At its center, the intricate gear-like grooves matching the brass key. He reached into his jacket and pulled it free. Took one last look at Axel. The dog watched him, unmoving, ears perked, ready. Eli fitted the key in and turned. A click. Then a low, grinding rumble shook the ledge beneath their feet. The square outline became a seam. The rock split. Slowly, agonizingly, the stone door slid inward, revealing a tunnel of pitch darkness that breathed cold, dry air. Axel let out a short huff, not fear recognition. Eli switched on his flashlight and stepped into the tunnel. Axel followed without hesitation. It descended at a sharp angle, walls lined with smooth, composite material metal, mixed with something synthetic. Not concrete, not steel, something else. A hum thrummed beneath their boots, faint but steady, like the heartbeat of the island itself. At the end of the tunnel was a steel hatch, naval issue, the kind used in submarines. Eli turned the wheel. It moved without resistance, as if waiting for him. The door opened. He stopped cold. Beyond it stretched a cavernous room, carved into the very foundation of the island. A domed chamber, easily 40 feet wide, with smooth walls and a faint bluish light, humming from hidden fixtures. Servers lined one wall, their indicator lights still blinking after decades of isolation. Consoles circled a central control station. Thick cables snaked into the floor, vanishing into unseen depths. It was immaculate, not dusty, not corroded, sealed and preserved. Eli stepped onto the grated floor. Axel's paws clicked quietly beside him, each step deliberate, as if the dog had walked these paths before in a memory not his own. He approached the central console, where a protective metal casing covered a single control panel. He flipped it open. At the center was a button, yellowed with age but labeled clearly in block print, Engage Acoustic Array. Eli took a breath, pressed it. The room responded like a living thing. A deep hum vibrated up from the floor, shaking dust from the ceiling panels. The server banks powered on with a gentle whir. The massive curved screen across the room flickered, then blinked into life. It showed a wireframe map of the local coastline. And then, color, movement, waves of pale blue light pulsed across the display, expanding outward in concentric circles from Falcon's Rest. Symbols populated the map, biological, mechanical, seismic, each with a different signature. A cargo ship 20 miles out, a pod of whales near the shelf, underwater vents emitting low-frequency rumble far to the north. Eli watched, stunned. It was like looking into the bloodstream of the earth. The screen didn't just show sonar, it interpreted it, predicted movement, analyzed patterns. The machine was listening to the ocean in a way no human could. And then he saw it. A small, slow-moving signature crawling just outside the normal shipping lanes. Unmarked, low frequency, could have been a sub, could have been something worse. He turned to Axel. The dog was sitting quietly beside the main terminal, eyes fixed on the screen. "You knew," Eli whispered. Axel didn't blink. This wasn't just a bunker. It wasn't a lab. It was a watchtower. And the dog had been standing guard the entire time. Eli stood in the center of the humming chamber, the screen still pulsing with waves of light behind him. His arms were crossed tightly, jaw clenched. The silence between sonar sweeps was deeper than any quiet he had ever known. It was the kind that pressed in from all sides, the kind that left no room for noise-only memory. Axel sat nearby, his body still, but his eyes watching. Always watching. Eli hadn't spoken aloud in nearly 3 hours. There was no one to talk to, and too much to say. The journal rested open on the console, its final pages filled with notations that weren't just scientific. They were philosophical. His grandfather hadn't just built a tool, he'd built a philosophy. A system designed not to dominate the ocean, but to listen to it. The idea haunted Eli, because he knew what it could be used for. With a system like this, quiet, undetectable, impossibly sensitive, you could track submarines in real time. You could detect deep-sea movements no satellite could catch. You could map undersea infrastructure, watch international waters, intercept communications buried in oceanic sound beds. Naval intelligence would kill to replicate this. Defense contractors would throw billions at it. And one wrong signature in the system's hands, one click of a military interface, and the entire philosophy of listening would collapse into targeting. That wasn't what this was built for. He paced. It was too much power for one man, too dangerous to leave dormant, too pure to hand over, and it was his. Not by merit, not by bloodline, by responsibility. He looked at Axel. He didn't just leave this for me. Axel's ears twitched, but he didn't move. He left you to test me. Axel blinked slowly, then stood, walked to Eli's side, and sat again, touching his flank gently against Eli's knee. Outside, waves slammed against the cliff walls of Falcon's Rest. The rhythm had changed. The tide was pulling in. So was something else. Back in Portland, Owen Barrett scowled at a spreadsheet glowing on his laptop screen. He was in his high-rise condo, lights dimmed, jazz humming in the background. untouched scotch sweating in a glass beside him. But his eyes were bloodshot and locked on the screen. The family trust accountant had just sent him a line-by-line breakdown of Julian Barrett's personal expenditures over the past 30 years. And the numbers didn't add up. Not in the way he'd hoped. Tens of millions spent. All traceable. But nothing went into stocks. No offshore accounts, no art, no classic cars or auctioned heirlooms. Everything, every red cent had gone to Falcon's Rest. And that meant one thing. His grandfather had buried something. The real kind of treasure. Vaults, gold, black market tech, a weapons cache from Cold War days. Something no one had ever been meant to find. Except Eli, apparently. Owen laughed under his breath, a dry, mean little sound. "You left it to the idiot in boots." He grabbed his phone and opened his private contact list. After a moment's thought, he made 2 calls. The first was to a man named Riker, a fixer, former private security with ties to off-books recovery operations. The second was to Jace, a former Marine with too many unpaid debts and too little hesitation. "I need eyes on a rock," Owen said simply, and a favor retrieved. He gave them coordinates, timing, and a promise of $10,000 each. No questions. Neither of them asked for details. They never did. The next morning, the sound of Axel's bark shattered Eli's concentration. He was back up in the cabin, sorting through more notes he had retrieved from a second compartment beneath the lab's main console. He dropped them immediately and went to the window. The sea was choppier than it had been in days. Far out near the horizon, a dark shape was cutting across the water, sleek and fast. Too fast for a fishing vessel. Too clean to be Coast Guard. Axel stood at the edge of the cliff, tail stiff, eyes locked on the approaching boat. Eli stepped outside and narrowed his gaze. The profile of the boat confirmed what his gut already told him. It was a private hire, likely with a shallow draft and reinforced hull. It didn't belong out here unless someone paid it to be. He glanced at Axel. "You know who sent them?" The dog didn't look back, just barked again. One sharp, deliberate call. Eli stepped back inside, grabbed the brass key, and checked the emergency kit he'd stashed behind the hearth. Flashlight, signal flares, emergency sat radio. His fingers hovered over the last item in the bag. A sidearm. Cold. Unfired in years. But it still clicked smoothly when he checked the slide. He didn't like it. But he'd seen this play out before. In other places, under other flags. When money gets desperate, and men think they're owed something, decency becomes optional. He looked at Axel. The dog had moved back to the door and was waiting. "Time to meet the family," Eli said. Axel huffed through his nose, and together they stepped out onto the rock to wait. The boat didn't belong. It was too white, too polished, too loud. Cutting through the slate-grey water like a scalpel, it roared into view just after noon. The sky had gone dull and heavy, thick with the kind of silence that always came before the Pacific struck. Eli stood on the ledge above the cove, wind flattening his shirt against his chest. Axel sat beside him, tail still, body tense. Both were statues carved from salt and instinct. Eli didn't need to see the face on the deck to know who it was. Owen Barrett stood at the bow of the yacht in a windbreaker that probably cost more than Eli's entire cabin. He wore boat shoes that had never touched real sea foam and mirrored sunglasses that failed to hide the smirk curling at the edges of his mouth. Beside him, 2 men, Riker and Jace, moved like men used to violence. One tall and silent, the other twitchy, eyes always scanning. The boat dropped anchor with a mechanical clank. Minutes later, a dinghy buzzed toward shore. Eli turned to Axel. "Watch them." The dog growled once, low, measured. Eli didn't go down to meet them. He made them climb the slick, uneven path up the rock, step by punishing step. By the time Owen reached the crest, he was winded and annoyed. "Cousin," he said, spreading his arms as if this was a casual visit. "Heard you've been playing lighthouse keeper." Eli said nothing. Owen's eyes darted around the ragged landscape, unimpressed. "You know, I've seen shacks in the woods more inviting than this dump. But it's what's underneath that counts, isn't it?" Axel let out a warning chuff. Riker's hand twitched toward something under his jacket. Eli didn't blink. "Call off your pets." Owen raised an eyebrow, but smiled. "You're wound tight." "Living out here too long will do that." "Look, I'll make it easy. I know there's tech here. My lawyers traced the financials. Grandpa dropped millions into this place. You think that was for plumbing?" Eli stepped forward, voice calm but solid. "You inherited the company. The houses, the private plane. You don't get this." Owen laughed. "I get everything. That's what you still don't understand." The sky cracked above them. A rumble deep and low rolled across the sea. Eli turned his head. In the distance, a thick wall of clouds was barreling in from the horizon, dragging the ocean's surface into jagged fists of white foam. A Pacific storm, fast, mean, coming in sideways. Owen followed his gaze and frowned. "We don't have long." "Then again, you don't either." Without warning, Riker stepped forward and shoved past Eli toward the cabin. Axel moved first. He surged in front of Riker with a snarl that shook the air, teeth bared, hackles up, his entire body low and lethal. It wasn't show, it was a line being drawn in stone. Riker froze. "Back up," Eli said. "Now." The wind picked up, howling through the cracks between them. Rain started falling sparse at first, then sideways in sheets. Owen shielded his face. "We're going in. With or without you." The front door of the cabin shuddered on its hinges. Riker and Jace moved fast, shouldering past the warning growl, forcing their way inside. Eli didn't follow. Not yet. Because at that moment, Axel did something he had never done before. He howled. It wasn't a bark. Not a warning, not a command. It was long, piercing, a sound that rose from deep within his chest and filled the air like a siren from another world. The kind of sound that made birds lift into flight and skin crawl. Then the cabin groaned. A thunderclap struck overhead as a wave smashed against the side of the island, harder than anything Eli had heard before. The entire structure shivered. The roof cracked. He didn't wait. Axel down. They turned and sprinted. Rain blinded his vision as they dove into the cabin, now shuddering under the weight of the storm. The back wall had started to split where the beams met the floor. Eli grabbed the edge of the hearth and heaved the slab up with one hand, flashlight in the other. The tunnel was waiting. He turned once toward the front door. Owen was shouting, trying to steady himself against a table that had just slid across the floor. Jace was backing toward the exit, eyes wide. Eli didn't call out. He didn't offer rescue. He dropped into the passage. Axel followed without hesitation. The slab slid back into place just as the front window exploded inward, and the last sound Eli heard above ground was a scream drowned by the roar of the sea. Darkness swallowed them. The tunnel was narrow, slick with condensation. Eli moved fast, the flashlight beam jittering across the metal-lined walls. The air turned cold and dry as they descended deeper. Behind them, thunder cracked like bones splitting. They emerged into the bunker seconds later. Eli sealed the steel hatch and turned the locking wheel until it clicked into place. Silence. Only the steady hum of the station remained. Below ground, it felt like the storm was happening on another planet. Axel shook the water from his coat and sat down beside the central console. Eli moved to the main screen. The map was still active, pulsing with blue sonar data. The chaos of the storm registered as a swirling mess of motion whitecaps and crashing swells throwing noise in every direction. And then, amid the noise, a shape appeared. Small, moving, approaching. Not Owen's boat, not Coast Guard. Too deep, too deliberate. Eli leaned in. A cold knot formed in his gut. Another signal. Axel stood and stepped closer, eyes locked on the screen. Whatever was out there wasn't coming because of the storm. It was coming for the island. And now, the storm above and the darkness below had them trapped in between. Eli and Axel, shoulder to shoulder, facing two fronts. One man-made, one unknown. The sonar screen pulsed like a heartbeat. Blip, blip. Then, silence. Eli leaned closer, his hand resting lightly on Axel's back. The dog's ears were up, body taut, sensing the shift before the machine confirmed it. In the swirling digital sea of storm static, something had changed. A signature moved under the chaos too clean, too smooth, too deliberate. Not the sea, not nature, a vessel, submerged. Got you, Eli muttered. The shape had been masked beneath the squall, using the very violence of the ocean to cloak its presence. Only someone listening with the kind of sensitivity Eli's grandfather had engineered could have picked it up. And it was getting closer. Eli tapped the console, filtering out wave noise, cross-referencing frequencies. It wasn't a whale, not any commercial sub either. The propulsion was too quiet, too surgical. Military grade, no flag, no ID beacon. Silent, a ghost below the storm. Eli's stomach turned cold. He stepped back, running a hand through his soaked hair. They're not here for sightseeing. Axel looked at him, as if waiting for the order only he and Eli could understand. This wasn't about Owen anymore. This was bigger. Someone had sent that sub. Someone with money, motive, and no fear of crossing borders. Eli moved quickly. The backup console near the rear bunker wall was covered in dust. Most of its switches hadn't been touched in decades, but his grandfather had kept it functional, just in case. He wiped the panel, fingers dancing over toggle switches and rotary dials. Found the frequency, 22.7 megahertz, an old encrypted US Navy emergency channel, mostly forgotten, except by the kind of men who knew where the real threats lived. He hesitated. If he hit send, this wasn't his problem anymore. It would be military, federal, headlines. But if he didn't, whatever was on that sub might walk away with tech his grandfather had built to listen, to heal, and turn it into a weapon. He looked at Axel. The dog's eyes were steady. Eli flipped the switch. Falcon's Rest to November Whiskey Command. Code Red. Confirmed hostile submersible approaching island coordinates under storm cover. Possible foreign retrieval operation. Immediate intercept requested. Authentication. Dagger 04. There was no reply. Only static. Seconds passed. Minutes. He sent the call twice more. Then the screen flickered. The sonar display adjusted again, this time showing two new signals, fast-moving, top water from the northwest. No effort to hide, no subtlety. Just power and speed and precision. Destroyers, two of them, moving like wolves toward a scent. Eli backed from the console. Guess someone's still listening. The submarine didn't stick around. As soon as the destroyers entered its proximity, it veered. Hard, south by southeast, it dove deeper, tried to cut under the ridge trench. But one of the destroyers anticipated it, pivoted like it knew the map by heart. A low rumble vibrated through the rock depth charges, dropped like punctuation. Not to destroy, just to warn. Eli watched the sub disappear off the grid. He didn't exhale until Axel sat back down, nose away from the screen. Outside, the storm had started to pass. The wind dropped, rain softened. The bunker lights flickered once, then steadied. Eli opened the hatch. The smell hit first wet ash, scorched wood, salt. Where the cabin had stood was now rubble, scattered like driftwood after a hurricane. What hadn't been torn by wind had been crushed by the waves. He stepped out slowly, boots sinking into mud, and there across the clearing stood 3 men, soaked to the bone. Owen, Riker, Jace. They were trying to limp toward the cliff edge, dragging a dented metal case between them. Desperation had replaced arrogance. Blood smeared Riker's sleeve. Jace's left leg was twisted, limp. Owen looked like a man who had lost the plot, but still clung to the last line of dialogue. "Don't move," Eli said, voice cutting through the quiet. They turned. Before any of them could answer, rotors beat the air. A black Navy helicopter dropped low over the ridge. Ropes deployed. Men in dark gear slid down with surgical speed. Within seconds, Owen and his men were face down in the mud, arms behind their backs. One of the officers approached Eli. "Call came through." "Dagger 04, huh? Didn't think anyone still had that clearance?" Eli didn't smile. "Just enough to ask for help." The officer nodded. "You got it?" "We'll take it from here." He gestured to the rubble. "What was up there?" Eli looked at the remains of his grandfather's cabin. What had once been legacy, shelter, memory now charred, waterlogged debris. A place that mattered. But what's important is still down there. As the agents led Owen and his men away, Eli turned to Axel. The dog's gaze hadn't left the horizon. His coat was slick with rain, but his eyes were sharp, alert, still watching, still guarding. "Come on, partner," Eli said, hand resting on Axel's shoulder. "We're not done yet." From the bunker below, the sonar screen glowed again. Not a threat, just the ocean. Listening, and 2 shadows man and dog standing watch as the tide began to turn. The rotor wash kicked up a storm of salt and ash, slicing through the fragile calm left in the wake of the previous night. Eli shielded his eyes as the Navy chopper descended just above the bluff, right where the cabin used to stand. The tailwind scattered soot across the clearing like pieces of memory. Axel stood to his left, steady, watching. He didn't flinch at the noise, his gaze fixed on the open door of the descending aircraft. He knew something was coming. The chopper touched down with surgical precision. Out stepped a man who didn't need to speak to command attention. His posture did it for him. Navy jacket, bars faded with time, but his presence crisp as a fresh salute. He was tall, built like a mast that refused to fall. His silver hair was cropped close. His eyes, grey and precise, swept the wreckage, the mud, the open sea, and finally, Eli. He didn't smile, but he looked like a man who had waited a long time to see this place again. "You must be Elijah Harlan," he said, voice like gravel dipped in oil. "I knew your grandfather. Served with him in '83. I'm Admiral Kent Voss, retired." Mostly Eli offered a cautious nod. He didn't talk much about Navy days. Voss stepped forward, hands behind his back. He didn't talk much, period. But when he did, he said this place could listen better than most men could speak. The Admiral crouched, picking up a burned piece of wood, turning it between his fingers. "I thought this station was gone." "Decommissioned. Looks like someone kept it breathing." Eli said nothing. The Admiral's eyes met his. "Was it you? Or the dog?" Axel gave the briefest tail flick like a half-wave, then stood straighter. Voss smiled. "Thought so." They stood in silence, wind playing across the cliff's edge. "I read the after-action report," Voss said. "The sub, the intercept, the arrest. Hell of a night. But what you didn't report was that you kept operating an unauthorized, long-dead military asset without pay, without orders, without backup." Eli's jaw tightened. "You here to shut me down?" Voss took a slow breath and looked out over the sea. "No, I'm here to make you an offer that landed like thunder in Eli's chest." the Admiral continued. "We've got listening posts across the Pacific, but this one Falcon's Rest was unique. Your grandfather built it for nuance, not just threat detection. He believed in sound the way monks believe in silence. And now you've turned it into something better." Voss turned to him. "The Pentagon wants to reopen the project. Quietly. No red tape, no logos. They want you to stay on, civilian contractor. Your clearance will be reinstated. You'll be well equipped, well protected, and mostly left alone. Your job is to keep this place running, listening, watching. Just like your grandfather did," Eli blinked, trying to absorb the weight of it. After years of isolation, of being discarded like a spent shell casing, this felt unreal. A man who had seen the inside of courtrooms, Virginia hospitals, and the wrong end of family dinners, now being asked to lead a ghost station back into relevance. "Why me?" he asked quietly. The Admiral studied him for a moment. "Because you're the only one who didn't walk away when it stopped being convenient. You stayed. You listened. You saw what was coming before anyone else." He turned, nodding at Axel. "And you've got the only K9 I'd trust on a black site." Eli looked down at Axel, who met his gaze with calm certainty, then looked back up at the Admiral. "I'll need time." Eli said. "You've got it." Voss replied. "We'll be back in 72 hours with new gear, new codes." "Think about it." He handed Eli a small leather-bound case. Inside, a new access badge. Silver, clean, unscannable. Just the word. Falcon. Voss started toward the chopper, but paused at the edge. "Elijah?" Eli turned. "Your grandfather said once, if the world ever goes to hell, sound will be the last thing to lie. You've proven him right." Then the Admiral was gone, rotors rising, slicing the sky, shrinking to a dot. Eli stood in the breeze, fingers wrapped around the badge. He felt something stir that hadn't in years, not adrenaline, not fear, not even pride. Purpose. It was a word that had once belonged to his deployments, his lost friends, the things he left behind. Now it belonged here. Behind him, Axel let out a low, rumbling sound, not a bark, just a hum of readiness, as if to say, "Told you so." Eli looked out at the sea, the wind tugging at his jacket, at the scars he wore like layers of bark. The past had chased him here. Now the future was asking if he'd stay. He turned back toward the entrance of the rebuilt tunnel, placed his hand on the cold steel door, and smiled. "Guess we've got work to do, partner." The Pacific wind hadn't changed, but the bluff had. Where ash and debris once lay, now stood a matte grey compound with anchor bolts drilled into the rock beneath. It was low, storm-proof, silent. Built for endurance, not comfort. Eli called it the Rock. The Navy called it Post 17 again. But to Axel, it was just home. Inside, the control room glowed with subtle light. Monitors lined the walls. Some streaming sonar returns, others decoding acoustic anomalies in real time. The long desk, custom-built, had 2 chairs, one for Eli. One Axel used like it was made for him. They'd been there nearly a month. Not once had Axel failed to react before the systems did. A low rumble of warning, a shift in posture. Sometimes a paw tapping the floor seconds before the tremor was picked up by any sensor. Eli stopped questioning it. He'd learned to watch the dog more than the instruments. The new seismic tether buried half a mile beneath the bluff was picking up something curious that morning. Tiny echoes, layered, rhythmic. Not mechanical, not natural either. The pattern repeated every 4 hours. Eli adjusted the gain, eyes narrowing. "You hear that?" Axel was already standing, tail low, ears up, focused on nothing visible. That was answer enough. A quick tap on the encrypted terminal cued a message. Anomaly pattern confirmed. Subharmonic, possibly biological or unknown tech. The screen blinked green. Transmission sent. 2 minutes later, a reply arrived, encrypted but immediate. Remain on station. Record only. Pattern known to us. Deep black protocol engaged. Eli stared at the screen. Deep black wasn't thrown around casually. It meant what they were hearing was something few had clearance to even acknowledge. He leaned back, heart steady, eyes moving to Axel. You already knew it wasn't just fish. Eli muttered. Axel gave him a look. It wasn't smug, it was confirmation. Almost human in its calm. They were past barking now. Outside, the ocean growled softly against the cliff. It was always louder after strange activity below. Later that night, a private channel opened. It was Admiral Voss. No camera, just audio. You're not to pursue, not even if it breaches the shelf. The voice said flatly. If anything surfaces, you observe and fall back. Do not engage. Eli's throat tightened. What are we listening to, Admiral? Silence. Then carefully. Something your grandfather tried to warn us about in '89. We ignored it. Click. Line dead. Eli stared at the comm for a long time. Then at the ocean. Later, during their usual evening round, Axel halted at the edge of the northern platform. He was stock still, hackles slightly raised. Not aggressive, just listening. One ear twitched toward the sea. Eli stepped beside him, felt the ground. No vibration, no sound, nothing on the instruments. Then came a pulse. Not loud, but felt in the gut, like pressure moving through water. Eli dropped to one knee. Axel pressed close. Out in the distance, far off the cliff, the surface rippled against moonlight. A single dark shape emerged and disappeared again in seconds. Too far to identify, and just like that, it was gone. No warning, no follow-up. Only silence, only the dog, who kept watching long after. Back inside, Eli logged the moment manually. No instruments had recorded it. Only Axel had. It happened again 3 nights later. And again a week after that. Each time, different pattern, different frequency. Always just beyond range. Always after Axel reacted. It became clear, whatever it wasn't random. And Axel was somehow in tune with it. Not just as a detector, but a kind of translator. He didn't react with fear. More recognition. As if he knew the sea had secrets to tell, and knew exactly when they'd start talking. Eli adjusted their protocol. He built a new signal bridge, hybridizing sonar input with behavioral flags based on Axel's micro-movements. The system now treated Axel's reactions as primary input. The Navy approved it within hours. Officially, Axel was logged as Biological Early Warning Unit, K9 Designate Alpha. Unofficially, Eli called him the real operator on this post. One night, during a fierce rain, Eli sat watching the logs while Axel slept beside him. Thunder cracked, wind howled, but below, the water stayed eerily still. Eli whispered into the dark. What are we guarding against, boy? Axel's eyes opened just for a second. No bark, just that look again. Not fear, not confusion, just readiness. And outside, the sea held its breath. The wind off the Pacific was razor-sharp that morning. Not violent, just precise. The kind of wind that slices through silence, cutting a line between what was and what is. Eli stood at the cliff's edge where the old cabin used to be, now replaced by steel, satellite, and secrets. His boots anchored into the rock. One hand rested on the black field journal passed down from his grandfather. The other held a pencil worn to a nub. Axel sat beside him, ears forward, body still but fully awake. The dog was older now, not in years, but in the way a soldier ages under pressure no one else can see. That silent cost of always being first to sense what others can't. Below them, the ocean pulsed like a heart-deep, rhythmic, unknowable. Somewhere in its darkness, things moved. Some explained, some not. But they weren't listening for answers anymore. They were just listening. Inside the station, sonar pinged softly. Eli opened the journal and flipped to the back. There were notes from decades ago, his grandfather's handwriting fading but sharp in purpose. March 17th, 1989. Falcon's Rest picked up a pattern. Biological? Mechanical? Don't know. Axel I reacted 6 minutes before any return. That can't be coincidence, the original Axel. A different war, a different mission. But some things didn't change. Eli added his own line beneath. March 24th, 2025. New pattern detected. Axel 3 flagged it 9 seconds ahead of sonar. Third time this week. Still not random, he closed the book and exhaled. The sea seemed to match his breath. Then came the call. Not from sonar, not from command, from Axel. A low, vibrating whine, not panic, not alarm, but intent. A kind of language Eli had learned to understand through time, through long nights when only trust stood between the world above and whatever pulsed below. He followed Axel's gaze. Out there, beyond the mist line, a shadow rose. Subtle, huge, just under the surface. Moving too smoothly to be a whale, too deliberately to be driftwood. No wake, no splash, just presence. Eli moved inside quickly, flipping on the wideband recorders. But again, no trace on the screens. Only the dog saw it. Only the dog felt it. And that was enough. The object submerged again. Gone. Like it had come just to remind them it was still watching. Still alive. Eli logged the moment. Date. Time. Axel's response code. He stepped back outside and let the wind cut across his face again. Axel stood waiting. The sun cracked through the clouds like a scalpel, slicing gold across the ocean's back. A moment of light in a long season of quiet vigilance. Eli looked down at his partner. Guess it's our watch now. No bark, just a subtle wag, as if the dog knew how heavy those words were, as if he accepted the burden without hesitation. They stood like statues for a few minutes longer. Man and dog, flesh and instinct, memory and mission. Then Eli bent down, scratched behind Axel's ear and whispered, "Your grandfather would have been proud." The station's comms buzzed once routine check-in, but there was nothing to report. At least, nothing they'd be believed about. Inside, the sonar continued to hum. Outside, the waves carried secrets only one man and one German shepherd could truly feel. The screen fades to black. Then a single line appears. What's your story with a loyal pet? If this story moved you, share it. Subscribe to support more real, emotional, and unforgettable stories of loyalty and bravery from dogs like Axel. This is German Shepherd, where heroes walk on 4 legs.